Susu.
Awesome. Anticipating. So awesome. Thank you guys all so much for joining us today. It's so great to have such a full room of people here. Could we first of all get a hands up of anyone who's first time at Fishburners? Awesome, guys. Welcome to the space. We're so glad to have you all here. My name is Magella, and I am the head of product on the Fishburners team here today. And before we get started, I would just like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet here today. We like to pay our respects to any elders, past, present, and emerging, because at Fishburners we celebrate diversity. So obviously today we've got an awesome panel lined up for you. We've got our lovely full room and also a full people online, which is great. So if you are watching online and you are interested in watching more of these events, we run our tech talks every Thursday, and we have lots of other roundtables and events like pitch nights happening. So you can always upgrade your membership and become a virtual member or a Sydney member. If you have any questions, we'd absolutely love to talk to you about them. But let's get on to the main event. I'm going to pass over to David to introduce today's talk. Thanks.
Welcome, gotta get this right. Welcome everybody. And welcome also too, we've got some people online, like groups of people are starting to tune in now. So High Pages, High to High Pages, if you don't know them, they're pretty far along the way startup as well too. So it's great that they're appealing to those. And also Western Sydney startup community is dialing in as well too. So great to have everybody online. So that's terrific. So without further ado, we're focusing on basically GPT generative in the context of startups today. So don't expect too much philosophy or wringing of hands as to whether, you know, our robot lords will take us over. We're going to just be sort of sticking to the practical stuff today, the kind of like the opportunities and risks for startups. So that's the scope of that. So I also mentioned about ethics as well too. So hopefully we'll cover some of those things as somebody who's developing products along the way. But I'll go left to right. So Luke Metcalf, I've known Luke since, I don't know if he was a StartMate founding mentor, just like myself. And he's also had one of the first data mining, machine learning startup meetups in Australia. So I've known him for quite a few years. So he makes an excellent man on the panel. What do you want to tell us you're doing now?
I'm doing a site called Microburbs. So we're collecting hundreds of millions of data points about Australia. So it's AI with anything with a geospatial component, best known as a real estate site. So we're finding that it works really well, having lots of data for forecasting suburb prices.
Great, excellent. And crisp as well too, thank you. Sean, tell us what you're up to.
I'm Sean, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Nullify.com. We're a security bot for your code base, so we detect and automatically fix security issues that we find in your code and packages. We just raised a 1.1 million pre-seed round led by OAF Ventures, and we're leveraging large language models to suggest code fixes for the security vulnerabilities that we find. So yeah, super excited to be here. Thank you.
Ron, I'm Claire. I'm the ventures lead at Terram Joint Ventures. So Terram Joint Ventures, we co-found new tech ventures with established businesses. So we combine the unfair advantages of our co-founders with our venture expertise and our capital. We're currently building a chatbot for farmers using OpenAI. So you can ask it any farming related queries and it solves all of those. So in regards to weather, plants, crops, animals, diseases, all of those sorts of things.
Oh, no, I'm back. Thanks, Claire. That's great. And Stephen.
Hi, I'm Stephen Hardy. So I'm the odd one out here. I'm actually expert partner at Bain & Co, management consulting company. We've got a services alliance with OpenAI, lots of GPT work going on. And but over the years, I spent a lot of time building and deploying machine learning AI solutions into the market with some team who are actually floating around here. I can see a few. So hopefully we can bring a different perspective into this.
Stephen's been at CSIRO and what was called Data 61, which was the technology part of that. So he's been doing it for quite some time. So we've got two in the middle who are very much on the tools today in terms of learning as they go, and we've got two people who've been on the tools for a decade, I guess you could say. So yeah, 2 decades. Still on the tools as well too, yeah. So I did have in the agenda what has changed since we actually started to do this particular thing. So we've seen things come out like Auto GPT and Chaos GPT, some toys that are coming out. But if we just kind of focus on the generative side of it for now, is there anything you guys have seen that's actually like the latest technology that you think applies to building products?
So obviously we found huge use in the API. From a machine learning point of view, actually getting the embeddings back. So that's like getting all of the long numbers associated with the text. That's sort of how it stores it. So you can think of it as like a 1600 dimensional view of human knowledge. So that's extremely good for like generating taxonomies and being able to find some text that's similar in meaning at different parts of the organization. So yes, very powerful from a content editing point of view. We were hiring for a marketing content person late last year that would be doing moderation. And we found with the new version of GPT that basically GPT would have got itself an interview from the test that we gave. So we had to make the test much harder.
Right? Using those things inside the tools that have come out more recently. So since we first started talking about that, the idea of agents, where you can take the text and then break it up into tasks that can be done over APIs, and the plugin architecture for OpenAPI, super rich and powerful, and that's really quite new and changes the product development landscape quite a lot. Yeah, adding memory, super important.
The interesting thing playing around with Auto GPT. So if we've got too many mics, is that the deal? Or yeah, I don't want to make too much noise. So if you haven't heard of Auto GPT, it's basically Python script package that can download, and it reaches out to the internet and it actually does a bunch of jobs for you. That is effectively an agent. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah, great. Okay. So in that particular situation, do you see anything particularly applicable to startups at this particular stage? Is it about data scraping and formatting the data and getting it? What are you thinking?
No, it's really about effective use of the capability. I don't want to draw this analogy too broadly, but in some sense, you can think of the language models as a new UI, except it's not visual, it's text, right? But UI isn't everything. There's the middleware layer that comes between that and perhaps some other processing that you're doing. Though that tool chain is exploding at the moment. There's so many things being built that allow you to accept information, break it up into tasks lists, or turn it into different sorts of structured data that you can then process in different ways. And those tools are just, every day there's either new features. So LangChain is, if you're after one that's really moving at the moment, it's a amazing tool, and every day the new releases have more capability, allow you to do more things. It's just keeping up is hard. I'm on a chat called the LLM fire hose, and it's not it's not incorrect to call it that. It's a lot.
So
Layer down in terms of what you're doing at your startup.
yeah, and it'd be interesting to see sort of where things have changed from when we first started building to now, because I think it's a question that we're always considering is, do we build something ourselves or do we wait for the next release? what's going to be in the next release, how much time do we invest in building them now versus just waiting, and what that trade-off is. So for us, when we first started, we didn't have the ability to ingest our own data sets. There was no conversational memory, so we've had to build all of that. We've contextualized the bot. We had started building image recognition, but we've sort of paused that, just waiting for GPT4. We're still on the wait list for that. But there are constantly sort of new features that are being implemented, and it is a case of, do we build now or do we just wait? And what is on the roadmap for GPT?
That example of actually pausing the image one is a really interesting thing. So as a product team, you've got to make decisions. You've got to say no more times than you say yes. So being able to actually sort of pause the image thing, what was your thinking there? That basically it's not sort of like top of funnel, like chat is really top of funnel and images are kind of like next.
Yes, and it's also where we are in terms of our testing phase as well. So at the moment, we just wanted to test the text and the conversational messaging. Image is something that we're going to test later, so that's why we decided to pause it, simply for that reason, that it will be a lot easier to integrate once GPT has the capabilities to actually recognize images. But at the moment, it's sort of deprioritized on our roadmap.
And the actual nature, maybe just to explain again what people do, a farmer comes in to the interface and asks a question.
Yeah, it's a chatbot, so you can chat to it like you would a friend, ask it any farming related queries, and it will, obviously reply in real time.
So what's the go-to-market here? Are you partnering with somebody that already had a captive audience?
We are, yes.
Yep. Okay. So it's not like you're out there trying to acquire them one by one.
No. So there's quite an active community of hobby and small farmers in Australia. And one of our potential distribution partners has access to a lot of those customers. So that's how we're planning on actually rolling it out.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah.
So we'll cycle back. But Sian, tell us how you've added in AI into your process.
Yeah, definitely. Is there any developers in the room or anyone like writing software? Yeah, a few hands. So it's been really useful for us to not just detect security vulnerabilities, but suggest fixes. So if you're a developer and you push up some code to your GitHub repository and the nullified bot detects there's a vulnerability here in your Python code. Previously we were thinking of rolling our own auto fix rules. So being able to suggest to the developer, this is how you fix the vulnerability. Whereas now we can just leverage the OpenAI API to just suggest fixes. And so the limit on that is, the ceiling on that's very high of what we can do. So another thing we're adding at the moment is, for example, if a developer's using a vulnerable package, using AutoGPT to kind of find an alternative to that package if there's no fix available. So we're just abstracting all these really compute heavy and logic heavy tasks to just models that have been trained really, really well on code, so they can do it way better than we could write our own auto remediation rules for. So it's very powerful for us.
Right, so what you're saying is that you're not even requiring to feed any of your own customers' code into an engine in order to be able to actually get remediation you've got.
We don't have to write our own rules to kind of suggest remediations. All we'll do is, for example, if it's a customer whose code is really proprietary, they would have to opt into this feature. But most of our customers, even the really regulated fintechs and financial services companies, they're fine with having their code being passed into language models.
Yeah, well, we might as well touch on that now, because there was a change with OpenAI that you can opt out of actually having your stuff go into training. So is anybody thinking about that at the moment in terms of privacy and ethics and stuff like that? Is that maybe because, say, for Bain you've got customers that have probably got a high corporate reputation, they're more likely to get caught out on these sorts of things. Not trying to out you on this, but yeah.
So I'll speak from my personal view, not on the side of the company. Yeah, so the recent changes, so if you use the API, the license was already pretty clear. You could opt in and out of whether or not your things were going to be used for training. But I think the recent new license terms they were talking about last week or the week before, much clearer again, should give a lot of comfort. You know, one of the issues for a lot of, say, Australian financial services companies would be you want to keep all your data inside Australia. Text has often got personal information in it, encoded in names or phone numbers or whatever it is. Hard to really rely. Actually, it's a great application for GPT-related technology is detecting all the things that you don't want to send overseas. But unfortunately, a bit of a catch-22 to use GPT, you've got to send it overseas to get it out. So then you have to deploy locally on Azure and off you go. So there are solutions to these sort of privacy problems. You know, you just have to make sure that you're not sending anything you shouldn't where it shouldn't go.
So just on that, just so I understand, so deploy locally on Azure, you're actually taking some sort of instance that has come from OpenAI and you can actually use that yourself in a
Yeah, so Microsoft has, you know, and OpenAI in co-investment, well, there's an investment, etc. They're integrating more and more, and I think this will develop more and more. And the other vendors, I'm not promoting anyone here, all have their own large language model solutions. But yeah, they've given that, for exactly this reason, they've given the capability for people to be able to control their, control the ring fence around which their data is sitting, so that you can make sure it doesn't, say, go to another country if it's regulated and it shouldn't.
So how would that work in terms, so it's a local instance and it's pre-trained and you get that as a snapshot, but then it'll fall behind?
It's just a service inside Azure.
Okay.
Sign up, get an API key, off you go. But it runs in your own instance.
Yeah. Okay.
In your own, sorry, environment, or how would you say it? Someone can help me out here. I'm struggling with the words. Yeah. Well, you're not actually hosting it yourself. Like it's just a service. But it's been run locally. Yeah.
Private cloud was one of the terms there.
Yeah, that's right. VPC.
Yeah.
There's also open source alternatives like Llama. So you can, and GPT-J back in the day. So they're not as high quality, but you do have the ability to download these big blobs that have it where it's already trained, and you can add your data on top of it, so that no data needs to leave your own servers.
Got it. That's great. So
Probably.
we need an AI for the volume control, don't we? When the mic comes up.
I'd just say probably Pythia because it's commercial use. So don't use Llama because it's non-commercial license. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. If they find you.
Tip number 1.
You can tell I'm not a startup.
Let's stick with data because so Luke goes way back and he had a site that was a real destination at one stage called Nation Master, and that used a lot of public data to actually be able to turn it into something digestible if you wanted to know something extra about countries and stuff like that. So you were using data mining for that. Tell us about what you're thinking in regards to public data versus private data. You're building a product. What do you think startups or any company should be thinking about in regards to spending time on, on AI that may be using all public data or all private data? Tell us what you're thinking there.
Yeah, so we're heading towards a more general intelligence. You can approach more general intelligence by having a very large and diverse amount of data that goes into models, which is what we do. So the ability to augment data becomes a lot easier now that you've got these like more universal ways of representing data. Everything just goes down to numbers, what's called embeddings. So it will get much easier to bring in public data and augment it with your private data and convert private data back into the kind of stuff that the LLM. So you're seeing this generalization of AI where different kinds of modes, it could be your CRM, it could be your transactions table, it could be the census or maps. All of these things much more easily come together as opposed to what you've got now where you might have different parts of the business. You know, the finance people look at aggregate transactions and, marketing people looking at campaigns. So yeah, public versus private, that will go away. Public data in general is higher quality as well. And from our point of view, much better ability for us to infer and derive data when it's not provided. So Queensland, for example, provides very fine-grained crime data down to a block and even less. We're able to learn from that and then apply that for the whole country.
Okay, that's very cool. So I guess what you're saying is that still you may be using some public data, but at the application level, there's still the opportunities to actually provide a superior user experience that surfaces that much easier, combined with other data that you have that's private.
Yeah. The combination of the public and the private will be, obviously your competitive advantage as a business is what private data that you have. That's the one thing that, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here, but that's a very powerful moat. So combining that with the public data will give you that edge.
You're certainly not jumping the gun. So on Twitter 1 or 2 Sundays ago, Nikki Shevak, the founder of Blackbird, said all data will go to zero. And Marcus Shappy and myself, popped up and said, yeah, what about private stuff? And didn't get an answer from him. If you're out there, Nikki. But so you're saying that remains a moat. I think it's an opportunity for a moat. Rest of the panel, thoughts?
At least,
like this commoditization of data that's available could mean that you might be building something that doesn't ultimately have lasting value.
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing that. I don't know if for anyone in like cybersecurity at the moment, a lot of cybersecurity vendors, if they're building applications that are like scanning your code, or maybe they're trying to find vulnerabilities in your cloud environments. That's all been commoditized now. So in security, like vulnerability databases are open source. So like all the companies that have built their whole business around like threat intelligence and things like that, those I think are like, they have to really pivot in terms of how they retain that business value, because now companies like us can just use large language models to query and pull information from those vulnerability databases for free. So a lot of those data moats, I think, in security have kind of evaporated, but it's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves over the next few years.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Because in security, you kind of get away with it for a while because, you've got so many dumb prospective customers that you can look magical at that stage, but that'll just be a massive landscape of competitors trying to, so that's really interesting. What are you thinking about this, Claire? So if you're using a lot of public data or you're using the OpenAI things, what are you thinking in terms of being defensible?
So for us, I think the public data is obviously will be commoditized. Where the value lies for us is having the ability for the individual to input, their images and things like that will never be able to be commoditized. It will always be reliant on having individual input and then getting something that is very much tailored to what they need.
Yeah, that's sounds perfect in terms of that building that moat. Yeah. So it's interesting, you come back to the images, there must be that temptation to get into the images and things like that.
It's a huge part of the value proposition, but just not something that we're immediately testing, at least.
Great.
In terms of the MVP.
Yep.
Yeah.
Again, Stephen, I guess corporates, plenty of data internally.
Yeah, so good example I think is Bloomberg. They recently released Bloomberg GPT. So that was a GPT variant trained on all of Bloomberg's data. So that's a lot. They've got a unique data asset. Now, there's 2 parts to this. Is it better than OpenAI's ChatGPT? Probably not, but that's largely because the method that OpenAI is using to build their bots at the fundamental level is more sophisticated than the method that was used to build Bloomberg GPT. Right? But if you equalize the landscape in terms of sophistication and method, there's still a little bit of an open question: how much advantage does the fact that Bloomberg has Bloomberg represent to them as an organization building a large language model? I just don't know the answer to that. So that's kind of right at the model level. Then the next question, most apropos for here, I think, is can you build your own data moat at the application layer where you've got access to something, where your business has collected information that other people don't have access to? Can you use then those foundation models to superpower your tool based on your local data? Again, this is like a question for the market to answer as to how much better, what's it worth.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So David McKeague from Curious Thing was going to originally be on this panel, and they're an AI startup that have been working in call centres and things like that, a bunch of different applications. I've put up a slide from his CEO, Sam. I saw Sam speak about a week ago, and his recommendation is to think about the layers at which you're operating at. And I guess what you're saying there, Stephen, is there's things at this particular level that you want to kind of optimize for in terms of building a data collection, a data reuse thing. At this layer, you don't need to be down here competing with infrastructure as such. That's kind of like a done space in a sense. It's
certainly not done. It's changing every day. Right? They're just going to get better and better. Right? That layer will get better and better and better, which makes the fundamental question is there any advantage in having a data barrier at the next layer up? Right? And I think there still is. I think there are examples where, certainly think of use cases where knowing a lot about, say, a customer in a certain vertical is going to help a lot in the way that you interact with that customer, say if it's a chatbot. But as the underlying models get more and more sophisticated, that's going to eat into that advantage. Right? But how much so, don't know. But interested to hear everyone else's view.
Yeah, one thing that's going to be interesting is when there is much more questions initiated by these chatbots. So if they start to ask, have you bought this kind of product before, as opposed to calling in a database. So if you know that this is the kind of customer that buys this kind of thing, can they do that interaction? And then there's other things like just thinking again about sales, so the micro expressions that people give off. It turns out AI are better at that than most people. So there are all these other tactics that these general AIs can provide that old school databases do not. And I think there'll definitely be a lot of cross-pollination between your relational databases and these chats. But yeah, I mean, in my view, just generating applications, generating interfaces is going to get very easy. So I think a real focus for business is like, how do we protect the data that we have? And given that focus, hopefully businesses will find a way to still have a moat.
And I think that's kind of like worth just sort of mentioning Curious Thing in that sense, because they're a conversation. They've always been about conversation, which means that the bots are actually asking questions back to you. In fact, when they started out, they were basically a job interview solution, so that you apply. What happens with jobs is, you get a massive amount of candidates in the top end, and you know that there's only 3 of them that really matter. But how do you get rid of the 977,000 or whatever it is? So you have these various points where the funnel gets narrower and narrower, and they were really helping with top of funnel in that situation. So in that process of conversation, they're actually building more and more data that becomes useful to them. So that's a really good example of that.
Yeah, I think the ability for GPT to test out, large language models to test out a very large number of different ways of having conversations with people will give it massive power, as opposed to this more one-size-fits-all that we have currently with these chatbots. So great potential for that business.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, from our perspective, my company's called Contextual, and we do guides, in-app guidance, tips, tours, etc. But we actually know where the user is in their journey. So therefore, we've kind of got a captive data set that's unique to each particular customer, but also similar patterns across all of the customer base. So we're pretty excited about that for us. So as a startup, that's an example about how we think this is really, really useful there. We're not interested at this particular stage in, say, personal data, but we're interested in behavioural streams and where people get stuck inside applications and so on. So, you know, we started off as just being onboarding, which is like the first phase, but you can go deeper into the journey. So that's just something to think about from a product perspective on that side of it. Yeah. So where would you like to take this next? Has anybody got a particular area? The way it works is we've got about 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll throw to the floor and ask questions, which is always fun. Oh no, maybe what we can do is, like, an important part is go to market, right? So go to market is, I've got some tech, but then how do I actually get people to actually use that? So this is kind of in the world of marketing and so on. So for the last 10 years since HubSpot created, content marketing or inbound, there's a lot of stuff around that, whether it's social, whether it's blog posts, whether it's email newsletters, those sorts of things. And then of course you've got other things around that, such as referrals and paid advertising and stuff like that. So there's a whole basket of different types of things you use to build top of funnel interest. How's the startup, just starting off with the startups, what are you guys thinking here in terms of the landscape change? We know that ChatGPT gives us the ability to produce pretty interesting, relevant content to my topic based on a feed. Is everybody aware of that? That I can just, like, literally I read out a poem, not a poem, a short story to my mother yesterday and made her cry. And all I'd done was actually given it a paragraph to say, what do I feel when I'm body surfing? And it actually, because she swims, it really resonated with her. But so it actually has the ability to produce content that creates resonant human emotions. So that's an interesting experiment. But, we kind of fear that we're going to end up with a spam apocalypse in terms of marketing content. If inbound marketing was bad, it's going to get a hell of a lot worse. What are you guys thinking?
I have to be very careful because my head of marketing just hired her last week. She just started this year, so
pressure's on you,
yeah.
not him.
I can't say that she's being automated out of a job, but I can say I'm sure she'll use some of those tools. But no, we have a press release coming out soon for the funding announcement, and I did use GPT to write the skeleton, at least the framework. So I can definitely see it changing that. But I'll leave it to that.
So we have been so deep in finding a customer problem that can be solved using AI that we're not yet at the go-to-market or the marketing stage. One of the things that we do consider with any venture that we partake in is having a distribution partner. So that is sort of critical to us, and that's something that we have solidified as part of the process now. So I think that's one of the main considerations for marketing for us, is just having access to customers or access to some sort of distribution channel.
Got it. Yeah. So that's a unique part of Terram's go-to-market anyway.
Exactly.
As you've basically got a ready-made audience in that sense.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So
Yeah.
the tools.
I would say go very fast. Don't muck around. I've been in the situation before trying to build on top of these models. So we were extracting information from articles, trying to identify crimes, when they happened, who was involved in all of that. And I built a whole lot of machine learning as well. And then the new version of DaVinci came out, so a new API, and it could do the entire job end to end. So I'd wasted 2 months. The closer you are to it, the more closer you are to text, the more dangerous it is. So I wouldn't be planning. You don't know how quickly development is going to be automated. I would focus on breaking things up into bits. So we don't know what's going to happen. Stephen, you mentioned before about the memory problem. So assuming that they don't solve the memory problem, the ability to break up a business into small bits that might be able to be promptable later. You can just have a non-programmer or non-expert in any field fix a little part of the thing. I think that's a great way to progress, and don't have any really long-term plans based on a technology.
Okay, so one of the things that what's the best way to spend the time, and maybe this will be interesting to get your thoughts as well too. We've kind of been thinking that open rates on content newsletters is dropping, and that's probably because we we don't write clickbaity enough emails maybe, or whatever, but we've been experimenting with events like this, that we create communities of things related to us. So Sydney Mobile Apps is a meetup group for us, and Android Australia user group as well too, because we're in the business of mobile apps, and so we're trying to add valuable content to those particular communities in that sense. So I don't know whether we're doing a good job or not, but we certainly hope you're enjoying today at least, etc. So that's one thing. So thinking about it in terms of just churning out content, actually trying to build communities. Alaha's here somewhere. There's a community specialist as well too. So you know, that's how we're approaching it. Is that a dumb idea or a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, very often an expert will ask GPT, try and check to see if it can do their job, and find out that their text is more nuanced and has more of that bite. That's the thing that's going to go viral. One question is, have you tried have you let it come up with 100 different variations, and did you try each of them? There might be things that are sort of left of center. I certainly find that being a data scientist, ML geek, I often miss what the customer's thinking, and sometimes GPT knows better, is more in touch with the common man than me, and can come up with what I think are much more bland tweets, but they're actually just like would appeal to that greater, broader audience, being much more well read than I am.
That's a good point. Good point. Yeah. So Sean's marketing VP, is it? What are you thinking? You're thinking you're going to still keep going with content, or more social? If you'd like to just kick him off, you know, he's obviously not qualified for this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, like there's so much content getting pushed out every single day, and there's no point in making content for the sake of making content. So I think from a marketing perspective, like the biggest thing is thinking about the value for your customers and your prospects, and then going from there, rather than looking at all these tools you've got, all these channels you can do. Yeah, look at the value first and see how are you going to achieve your goals, and then pick your channels from there. And definitely, I think, go to ChatGPT first for any long or short form content, and then iterate from there to save time.
Okay, so it's a very similar sort of thing. It was interesting what Luke was saying, was give me a large number of variants that look like potential experiments, like a double down on that. That was a pretty interesting idea.
Really useful also, but just like, tell me all the things that I'm not thinking about. So you come out with some marketing. It's like, what are all the extra bits? What are the other elements to this? What are the follow-up bits of context that you could be providing?
Got it. Stephen, we kind of skipped over you on the marketing side. Was that profiling in an inappropriate way?
The thing I'd say here is that there's obviously an arms race, right? It's competition for attention. And so the generation tools are getting better and better. So the protection tools will presumably get better and better. And that's like an opportunity as for startups to look at how to guard your attention from being grabbed by the perfect email sent by something you're not actually interested in. Right? But the cross side of that is that you'll build your nice little bubble that you'll live in and not see anything that doesn't agree with your point of view. So interesting times.
All right, cool. So I'll move on to ethics. That's right. I'll move on to ethics, and that's there was kind of a little bit of a hint there. So there's the ethics in terms of how you use potentially content in your own product, but there's possibly worth having a little bit of a look at the ethics of your own staffing situation and so on. Like, am I replacing people here? That sort of question. In terms of my perspective, I kind of think it makes good developers better, and I'm not quite sure it makes mediocre developers that much better. I'm not sure, I'm not quite sure where we're at with that. I think it gives me some options in regards to some of the offshoring type situations that, if you're getting some of your services done overseas and it's not satisfactory, I kind of wonder whether that's going to be an opportunity to improve, perhaps with an intern onshore as opposed to or a more junior developer who's more switched on sure than somebody who's, I like to sort of think of it in terms of muggles and so on, but everything's, we're going to be using the tools that are available to actually level up everybody, and if somebody's actually resisting moving that, we kind of got to consider whether they've got a place in the landscape, because it is an arms race, both at a marketing level and a technology level, because let's face it, we all have competitors, so that's a tricky situation. So Mike's with you, Stephen. Have you got any kind of thoughts in regards to the ethics around product, or too broad a question? I think it is.
I have some strong opinions about the ethics of the use of AI, but I don't really want to talk about job displacement, etc. Pretty much every there obviously will be impacts, but with every general purpose technology that's come along that improves efficiencies of people working, employment's gone up. There's no counterexample to that. So obviously we have to look after those who will be impacted. But, more broadly on the ethics front, I think it's important to think about how, if you're using generative AI and AI to interact with customers, what harms might you do them, and how do you protect from that? One thing that really puzzles me, so I really have a great answer, is how do you actually do effective testing, not in market, but pre-market testing of your product if it uses prompts that have a random element? You can't predict what's coming out at the other end for the same prompt, right? How do you test that so that when it's in market, you don't do some harm that might damage your brand or just damage someone, which is not something that you want to do? So lots of big questions around how you use these tools in a way that's safe. So questions?
Very good. So you're actually saying a traditional survey tool may actually be the more powerful instrument where you're actually trying to get correlation, something that's correlated back to you. So that's an interesting idea there. So Claire, what are you thinking? The farmers, the pictures.
So from an ethics perspective for us, one of the things that we're considering is what happens if the chat gives incorrect advice, or it's advice that doesn't align with what the farmer wants to do, and then they, then go and implement it. What are our ethical liabilities, and what are our values around that as well? And then what does that mean in terms of the products that we're building, and whether it's confining it to certain responses, or what does that look like is very much a question that we're considering at the moment.
Very good. So that's in security, there's false positives and there's false negatives, pretty well trodden path. Tell us what you're thinking.
Whenever we suggest code fixes generated by GPT, we have to guarantee some level of correctness. So we won't suggest it unless we've tested server side before it gets surfaced to the customer that it fixes the security issue. As for ethics, it's really shaking up security at the moment, because now you have red teams and offensive security practitioners using GPT to do things like craft exploits. So asking GPT to write malware, and it's quite good actually. It's pretty scary. So it's really interesting. I spoke to a security leader, a CISO at a massive scale up the other week, and I was trying to just gauge how they were feeling about buying cyber vendors using AI, and to my surprise, they're quite open, simply because all their developers are already using GitHub Copilot. So I think everyone's just gone with it. And to your point around developer productivity, if they can hire less people by just augmenting their existing developers with those tools, they'll go for that. And as for job replacement, I just hired a head of marketing, so not replacing anything just yet.
Yeah, so we also touched on this where the data goes type thing. So it's just, we've already covered it, but it's worth sort of mentioning about that. And what about in the situation where the data's going into your models? I guess you're kind of thinking that that's where you might get a wrong answer back out, or an inappropriate type thing may come. Response to the customer may be, maybe I think Stephen wants to say something. Oh no, all good.
To address Stephen's concern about asking the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing to customers that might hurt the brand, I think there's something to be learnt from the market research industry, where you'll start with a qualitative focus group where people can speak more freely, and that might be like a safe environment that's not the general public, but preferred customers or people who are paid for on a panel, and you have more free-form conversations with a subset of your customers, and then you can use large language models to actually summarize all of those messages. There's a lot to be done in terms of the summarization in general of customer feedback in terms of CRM. So like, what are the 5 main things that customers are concerned about? And then you might have a phase where you sign off on particular lines of communication. It might not be as deterministic as an old school chatbot, like in that chatbot craze a few years ago, where it was all just like forms, you're just clicking on, it's basically just a tree. Decision tree kind of thing. So it might be beyond that. To address your point about offshoring, I found it can work the other way, where suddenly the offshore person over in the Philippines has more cultural context. So for us, we do podcasts talking about suburbs in Sydney. How is someone from Manila to know that Ultimo is a suburb and not a superhero? So the LLM can tell them that, so they can tag that bit. So, and also it can massively improve the English and get them to think in a more Western way in terms of like answer the question first and then follow up with other points. So there is some advantage for the offshore labor as well, I would say.
That's really excellent point. Yeah, appreciate you bringing that up. All right, so I'm conscious to not be doing the wrong thing with either the panel's time or your time as well too. So what I'm going to do is open it out to questions. Clearly we could sit here all afternoon and actually talk about a lot more, but just, yep, so we got some, I guess what we've got to do is we'll borrow one of the mics and use that to distribute around. And please put your hand up. And man, if you've got questions online, please let us know as well too.
Hi, really interesting talk and thanks for everybody coming. Quick question, it's moving so quickly. Are there any sort of, for each of you, which is your favorite source of a Twitter follower or YouTube channel, whatever it might be, that just it gives you the leading edge of where everything's actually going right now?
Stephen's fire hose sounds interesting if you've got the time. Oh, it's an invite only.
I always refer to Y Combinator. I think it gives really good insights around tech and AI. So that's Y Combinator, Reddit, all of those forums.
Definitely like Hacker News for YCom. I'm cheating a little because we have one of our engineers wrote a Slack bot that just scrapes a lot of these newsletters, and then it's like a little Slack channel, just sends the latest updates to that Slack channel. So some of the news sources are things like Hacker News, Reddit, daily.dev is good as well. But I think developer communities is where a lot of the innovation is happening. So maybe start there.
Sorry, I would say the same on the text side of things. On the image side of things, that I'm more just a bystander. I'll just watch YouTube videos like Matt Wolf, 2-minute papers, that sort of stuff is quite, video format works quite well for that stuff.
And Claire is, I'll come to Claire, the Y Combinator stuff is Hacker News is good enough for product people as well too. So you've got your dev side and then you've got your product people. So
for product side of things, I'm just focusing on doing the work, and I rely a lot on customer input. So that is sort of like my source of, I guess you'd call it, intelligence for actually building out the product side of things.
So not trying to photocopy what other people are doing, just focusing on your capstone. Sounds good. Yep. Stephen's, he's going to give out the secret feed address.
No. My go-to, I look forward to it every week, is written by someone lives up near Macquarie Uni, Robert Dale. Used to run the natural language processing group at Macquarie. and he has something called This Week in NLP. I really recommend it. This Week in NLP, and top to bottom, it's great. It's just chunk, chunk, chunk. Every link, pretty much.
So that's really interesting. Australia, how, just generally speaking, Australian academics and companies, are we seeing that we're actually competing at a reasonable level, or are we just followers?
You really wanted David McKeegan in the seat to answer that question. I won't channel David.
Yeah, we don't have enough time.
Yeah. So just globally, really interestingly, the number of big papers about NLP that have been published, about languages and language models being published by academics has dropped from 95% 10 years ago to about 5%. Right? Access to compute is everything in that space. And Australia doesn't really have a compute facility that supports the building of our own language models. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Next question. All right, yes, please pass on. Yeah.
Sean, there we go. I'd like to really dig into more about around the discussion about the moat around software and really what becomes of software in the future. So for like the Nullify example, and before GPT came along, you were thinking about this project of creating fixes for code. It would have been a huge thing, would have been a big kind of valuable bit of IP. Now all of a sudden that is being kind of almost outsourced to GPT. And how did that really affect your business planning and your thinking around the business, and how are you going to protect the business from other competitors?
Yeah, it made us very happy because it means we just like could move that feature forward like 6 months on our roadmap, because basically overnight we were able to just leverage all that intelligence. In fact, if we had started earlier, we only closed around like the start of this year, a team of 10 now. If we had started the company early and we'd already gone down that path of building those remediations, and then GPT came out, and then we just burned like 6 months of runway doing something that's like commoditized now. And then our scanning logic, like we actually just integrate open source scanners. Wherever there's no scanner that supports the language, for example, like, I don't know, some bank uses COBOL or something, that we can even just use ChatGPT to scan the code. So that way, like in that diagram earlier, we can focus on like the business logic application layer, like focus on how we're integrating with developers in their workflows, and just not compete at all in terms of like the computation or the logic. So big cyber vendors that we're disrupting, Snyk, Checkmarks, all these really big players, they must be really worried because overnight their companies just become commoditized. So yeah, we're happy with it though.
So that's really interesting because all of a sudden does it become valuable building a great big software company because overnight it can be disrupted by something else? Like, is there any longevity now to software?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Like if you're a B2B SaaS company and like you're building something where your core business value is just commoditized overnight, then you definitely need to like just do a really good like value chain analysis around what it is what business value you're delivering to your customers. So for us, it's like embedding a security bot into the developer workflow and engaging really well with them. So that's where we kind of have a lot of defensibility, or our moat is around, or our differentiability is around like how we integrate versus like the logic of the scanners, because that, to your point, isn't really, it's just table stakes now. Yeah.
I mentioned before just how we were looking at it in terms of, yes, we can actually uptick the value to our customers to be able to provide something on top, because we know more about the user's journey with that kind of technology. So there's opportunities there on that, doesn't change too much. Incidentally, that the next meetup that we're doing is around like the intersection of no code. So it's kind of a bit of a question, and just a general question for people who are doing the early phases of startups, whether there's a value add in terms of using AI on top of that, being able to MVP things a lot faster and so on. So it's probably not where you're asking the question from in terms of building a business for the longer journey, but anyway, so that's the topic. So if you're interested in that, just scan the the QR there. All right, next question. One right up the back.
You guys spoke about public and private data and the moats that they can create. Where do you see web scraping fitting into this? Is it something that you see as being commoditized, or is there value in that kind of data, particularly around like more recent things like news or e-commerce or user-generated content?
One person we can go to for that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So on the one hand, web scraping, so the extraction of data from HTML has got easier. So you can convert HTML to JSON. It may well be that a large number of large sites that aren't getting a lot of SEO benefit out of all of their deep content will get annoyed at all of these chatbots downloading their pages without that, and then summarizing it without going to it. So I expect that there'll be a lot more pages coming down off the internet as the SEO model gets broken down, and there are fewer people using search engines. And there'll be more blocks on bots. So my prediction is it's going to be harder to scrape and there'll be less content to scrape as the open web model gets broken into this new direct chat intelligence model.
You mentioned about SEO there, and it was the question I forgot to ask during marketing. I think we've got some sort of like, with the spammy content, with the ability to go and get kind of like a very authoritative sort of response to things, you know, is everybody thinking SEO is dead?
I wouldn't say it'll suddenly die. These things take time, and it may evolve such that, so you can go to ChatGPT and ask what are the 10 best sources for property data, and we show up as one of the 10, right? So that's just a new way of doing SEO. And so for us, instead of it just being a whole lot of content for free that we would sell subscriptions for some premium, it might be you're asking who has special knowledge that this bot doesn't have, and you download there. So it becomes less about pages and more about knowledge and establishing credibility and getting people to describe how credible you are.
If I combine the last two answers together, it sounds like you must run some sort of defensive strategy from having enough of your content scraped in order for the playing field to be leveled out.
Yeah, that's right. There won't be the same incentive to put content out for free in future, unfortunately.
Right. Okay, so if you're an SEO play, that's an interesting one. Anybody else have some strong opinions on that topic? Yeah.
Like, I was just going to say, I don't think search engines will ever be redundant. I don't think GPT replaces search engines. And if you think from a user's perspective, say tonight you want to go find a nice recipe for spaghetti bolognese or something, you're not going to go to GPT, which is going to give you one recipe. Maybe you want to find 10 recipes and assess them for yourself based on, I don't know, the different reviews, etc. So I don't think search engines are ever going to be replaced, and therefore optimization may change, but I don't think it's ever going to be dead.
Okay, controversial. All right, next question.
Hello, thank you for doing this. I work in digital marketing and social media analytics space, and one of the agencies that I'm working with is a kind of public relations firm that does hospitality and lifestyle marketing in that niche, and they're very excited about what AI in general is going to do for the future of marketing and communications. And also, I'd like your thoughts on the future of Marcom or Marcoms, if you have any opinions or knowledge in that area. And they're also putting on an event in East Sydney with a group about this size, and they've got a couple of panelists already, but they would be interested in another panelist, which we can talk about. But I'd just like your thoughts on the future of marketing and communications from an agency, a creative agency, and also an agency like the one I work with that does a digital marketing technology and hasn't yet started to roll out an AI machine learning technology within that, but the app has been built and is providing business intelligence platform for agencies that do digital marketing. Just your thoughts on marketing and communications. Thank you.
Yeah, so just taking one thing that happens in PR, you might have an example testimonial client that you roll out to say how much they've got an interesting story that grabs whatever the zeitgeist is. And that is based on some personal relationship, or maybe they did a query of the database or something, but it's a very small number of people who get to be that. Imagine if you were able to scan the entire CRM, find out all the different stories that all the customers have had, and then to map that to all the things that are being talked about in the media at the moment. So there will be very timely things that from a media perspective, PR perspective, that individual customers are going through. So I imagine it, instead of it just being a real top of the pyramid kind of thing, you'll be able to try out in a rather automated fashion, a whole lot of different hooks that go deeper into your customer database, and also the experiences of employees and different parts of the business. So as things get more micro and more targeted, there can be many more stories uncovered and tested out at much lower cost.
There you go, a product has just been created. Get on it. Anybody else on that? Just, it's a pretty good thought from Luke.
I was actually going to say, I think that sort of stuff, I think is just going to be added to like Zoom Info, HubSpot, like Apollo, all of the SaaS products that digital marketers use for both sales and marketing. I really think they're just going to integrate that. They already kind of are, like, you can use Zoom Info to see like who's searching about security products, and then like use that as like a buying signal to do outbound. So I reckon that's just going to be supercharged by these integrations. I probably ask Susie knows better than me, but yeah, it's going to be table stakes, I think, at some point.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so once again, private data is certainly factoring in here.
I have a question. Thank you for the talk. My question is around the use of generative AI and large language models for scientific discovery. So I'm quite excited about what the use cases for enhancing scientific discovery, such as uncovering a lot of peer-reviewed or like papers that hasn't been peer-reviewed, and digging out, even suggesting experimental designs for people to run through, and really using AI as part of, like, AI scientist, a kind of dangerous term, but what is the future, and how do we advance scientific discovery and enhance that piece of technology progress?
So it's a little bit out of scope for today's talk, but Stephen's probably a good person to go to on this.
There are already a bunch of really interesting tools available publicly for searching using AI tech, large language models tech, to make it easy to understand something. Right? You say, oh, I want to know about genetic engineering of sheep, right? And you don't want just like the surface level; you want the science level. Mapping out. It's a lovely graph of all the papers and what cites what and which ones are the most important and what order to read them in. Right? That makes a scientist's life easy. So that's like a public product that came out of the Allen Institute in the US. Right? It's actually nice design, nice thing to play with. But more deeply, the same sort of techniques being applied across lots of sciences in lots of ways. And it's like healthcare, genetics, all those sorts of things. It's going to be interesting times for the next 10 years, at least.
Thank you very much. All right, so we've gone way past the hour, so I really appreciate everybody coming along. As I mentioned before, please sign up to the meetup group if you want to learn more about this stuff. You'll notice we didn't try and sell you anything today. We'll do that the next time. But do that, because we're really interested in building a community of people who are actually interested in this intersection of product and the new technologies that are coming along. Please thank the panel. They were wonderful. And wish you all a very good afternoon. Thanks, folks, for coming. Appreciate it. Oh, sorry, I just forgot to mention, if anybody has a venue that would be good for the next meetup as well too, we're interested in finding out. So it's typically got to be in this, in and around the city and so on. But we'd love to talk to you. High Pages, I'm looking at you. So thanks a lot. Oh yeah, thank you.